Hello everyone and welcome back to Clinical Psychology Community UK. My name's Holly and I'm really hoping you can hear me. Let me know in the comments if you can't. Last time I went live I completely forgot to unmute my mic, so hopefully you can hear me. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our live Q&A all around DClin applications because it is the DClin season, to be jolly. So what I thought I'd do is start off with a little PowerPoint, just so we can go through some of the basics of the application and then go into some questions. And I have had some questions through from some lovely people on Instagram as well, so I can go through some of those. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat and I will get to them in a min. So let's get into some of the basics then. So the basics of the DClin. I'm sure you will know this, but it is a 3-year full-time doctorate program in clinical psychology. It's called the DClin Sci because that is the exit award. Much like when you do a bachelor's, that is a BSc, a Bachelor's of Science, or an MA, a Master's of Arts. It's a DClin Sci, that's what it is. And the only part-time course, I think, is Lancaster at the moment. There might be more talking about doing part-time courses, but the Lancaster one does have some part-time places as well. There are 32 universities that offer a DClin Psych course in the UK, and you can apply through Clearinghouse, and that is for 30 of the courses, and 2 of the courses also ask you to apply directly. And that is University of Hull and Queen's University Belfast. The programme does consist of teaching alongside clinical placements. Teaching usually follows the academic terms, and typically it's 2 days a week teaching and 3 days a week placement. But teaching blocks vary on each course, so for example, our course has a 4-week teaching block in first year, at the start of first year, then usually 2-week or 1-week teaching blocks throughout. And some courses have only teaching blocks and then only placement. It really depends. So have a little look on Clearinghouse and their websites as well, because it'll have all the information on there. I'd also encourage you to think about how it is that you want to study. So I think I would have really struggled with a sort of 12-week teaching block and then placement. I think I'd much prefer our version of it, which is 2 days teaching or study days and then 3 days placement. So let's look at the application and some basics to do with it. You can apply once per year, and as you all know, we are in that at the moment. Applications open in September. This is based on last year's presentation, last couple of years. So open in September for the next September's entry. So if you're applying this year, you're applying for September 2024 entry. The deadline is typically mid-November, and you can only apply to a maximum of 4 courses through Clearinghouse. Places are funded, and course fees and salary are paid for by a government body. So it depends if you're Wales, Scotland, England, or Ireland as well. And there are some self-funded places available for a handful of courses. I think it's 8 courses, and they only usually have between 1 and 3 self-funding places, so there's not that many. And it usually falls for international candidates who aren't eligible for the NHS funded. And there is a standardised application form. And you apply via Clearinghouse, which costs money. There is a debate around that. And there are also, a few years ago when I was applying, there was something on Twitter called, I think it was DClin Psy Connect. And they would have people that could afford to pay for an application. So they, qualified staff or whoever would say, yeah, I'll front the 40 quid that it costs to apply for somebody that can't afford it. So, and there was, no means testing, no anything like that. So you should be able to access it if you can't, because it is a significant barrier. And there aren't really many other jobs. Remember, this is a job that you have to pay to apply to. So, yes, hopefully that will at some point go away. And then let's look at the timeline. So, again, you probably know this already if you've applied, but I'll whiz through it. So September, applications open via Clearinghouse, and November is the deadline. And also for Queen's Belfast, that's the application deadline. In March, usually, is the deadline for courses to feed back the application outcomes. And they usually send them either in batches or in one total lot. So they wouldn't, tell all the successful people and then wait a week and then all the unsuccessful people. So you should find out all in one tranche. And then March to May is when the interviews are. April is when the Hull deadline is as well. But I think for Hull, you have to have done the undergrad there or something like that. So have a look on the website if you live near Hull or are interested. And then June is usually the deadline to accept places. So that is the overall timeline. I have put this elsewhere on the channel as well. So if you want to look at it in more detail, it is on the 2021 DClin Psych application talk. Let's get into some of the questions then. Thank you so much. I can see we've had some questions through from you lovely people watching on YouTube. I will go through some of the Instagram ones, so it gives you a chance to ask any questions that you've got. Have a think. I'm happy to answer anything to do with applications, or even the DClin in general, actually. If you find that that would be helpful for writing your application, knowing a little bit more about the DClin, ask away. The first question we had was, what other roles beside assistant psychologist and research assistant count towards DClin Psych eligibility? Which is a really common question I get. A huge amount of roles can be relevant. So I always advise people to go for support worker roles, healthcare assistant roles. Virtually any role in the NHS will be useful in some capacity. It will be the most useful if you can work in a team where there is psychology. So if you can work as a support worker in an MDT team, so that was my first role out of uni, was an NHS support worker in a weight management service, which had dietitians, physiotherapists, doctors, medicine, endocrinologists, and psychologists. So I got to work quite closely with them, because part of it's not just getting relevant clinical experience, it's also they want to know that you know what a clinical psychologist does in the NHS. They want to know that you are sure that you want to do this as well. So that's definitely something important. I think honestly a huge range of roles can count towards eligibility, but it really does depend on the course. So some courses there's a huge variability in all of the courses, and some courses may value research experience more highly than clinical experience, depending on the uni. So the course that I'm on really values research experience massively. Not necessarily downplays clinical experience. I think they also think that that's very important. But if you, for example, have a strong research background, then, look at courses that value that research. That could be really helpful. So I have done a video on how to get an assistant job as well, because that is the reason that's the gold standard, is because you're working with a psychologist. You are being supervised by a psychologist, which is the biggest part of this. Because what they're trying to assess is how are you going to be on training, what sort of trainee are you going to be, and if you don't have the experience of being supervised by a psychologist, alongside all the other bits of the DClin that are tricky, you need to know how to use clinical supervision. You need to know the sort of things that are appropriate to bring to supervision, and you need to know the sort of way that psychologists are going to ask you about stuff. And be curious about things. So there's a huge range of roles, but working with a psychologist is the key, I think. Okay, and the next question we had was, what is the best way to structure your answers for the application? I can also see there's a couple of questions come in around this sort of thing, so I'll try and answer. So in the big video that I've done, so I've done 2 different videos on DClin applications, but in the biggest one, the 2021 one, I go through each question of the personal statement and make some suggestions on things that you can add. In terms of structure, it's really open, which is difficult because the character limit is tight. One of the best things that I would say is you cannot fit everything in. Okay, it's not possible. You can't look at all the competencies of training and fit them all into the personal statements. You can't do it. So what you've got to do is, and I think in some ways this is really helpful for the reflection, because you have to reflect. You have to narrow down the experiences that you want to talk about and how it applies to training. So the way I would structure it is, once you've done some reflection, you've got some ideas, I would think of a few different things about training. Okay, so what aspects of training are you looking forward to? What aspects of training do your experiences make you ready for? If you have loads of research experience, it might be that actually juggling 3 different publishable standard research projects is going to be easier for you. So you can talk a little bit about that. If you've got more, if you've trained in therapy, that's a huge advantage. You're going to have, or a PWP, huge advantage. You're going to have loads of knowledge about CBT, which is the main modality that we're trained in. So talk a little bit about that. So not just the teaching aspect of learning about CBT, but also the placement aspect. So choosing those, I would kind of reverse engineer it. So you're thinking about which aspects of training do I really want to think about? Do I really want to write about? Again, you can't write about them all. Not possible. Not in enough depth to reflect. So I would choose 3 or 4 aspects of training that you want to talk about, and then think about, okay, so which experiences make me amazing at doing those aspects of training, or which bits of my experience mean that I'm going to be able to juggle this part of training. That's one way of doing it. There are people that are super, super creative, and I am not this creative, but there are some people that structure it in terms of like a poem, or I have heard of people structuring it, I can't remember the name of the thing in addiction, the serenity statement, structuring it kind of like that. So it's really open that you can do what you want with it, but I would advise you to do what feels right. A lot of psychology is actually about intuition and clinical judgment. So I'd really encourage you to think about, okay, do I feel like I'm coming across in this? Does this feel right? Okay, I'll stick with this structure. Another way you can look at it, you can think about the way that I looked at it. I didn't reverse engineer it. I decided to think about what my biggest lessons were in all the years of experience that I had before getting on. And then I thought about how they link to the competencies that I wanted to talk about. So yeah, that's definitely one of the things that I would think about, and I'm really just talking about the first personal statement question, in what way do your research and clinical experiences make you a better candidate for training? That's the one that's the chunkiest. You've got 3,000 characters for that one, including spaces. So that's the one that you really do have to be very succinct with, in terms of, how you are a better candidate. What I would always say is, once you try and stick to 1 or 2 related points per paragraph, and always at the end of that paragraph, I would say, link back to training. Link back to the specific aspect of training that your experience makes you ready for, if that helps. So that's a few different ways that you can structure that answer. I would say for the next question, the dissemination question, you can list your citations. I wouldn't put a link to a study or anything, because they're not going to click it, because they're just not. They can only look at what's on the application, so they're just not going to be looking at that. And also what I would say for the dissemination is try and split it up into categories. So yeah, you could just write a whole list of citations, but I think what helps people more, because I'm a 4th author on a paper. I didn't really do anything. I delivered the intervention and drafted a few bits for writing. So I think it depends. I think you need to usually provide a bit more information. So the dissemination section can include resource development that you've made for groups or for clients. It can include staff training that you've been involved in. It can include literature reviews, audits. It can include all of that. It's really useful stuff. But I would try. So what I did in mine was split it up. So I had my publication, a couple of publication things, and then I had service improvement, I think, as a heading. And then I used kind of bullet points. I numbered them by saying, this is a project that I did. This is what impact it had, because that's the most important thing. It's not just, I've done this research study, here's the citation. It needs to be, I've done this research study and I was involved in the all aspects of it, or I did this audit in my service as an assistant, and this is how the findings were used clinically. That's the bit that they're interested in. It's how you make research practice links. So I would always add a bit more colour into there if you can. And I can't remember what the other one was. No, I can't remember what the other heading was. I'm really sorry. So yeah, that's that question. I think in terms of what you want to gain from training, that third question, that's really tight. I think it's 750 characters. So for that one, I would really think about the courses that you're applying to. If you're applying to courses that have all of them have systemic as a secondary, you could write about how you want to learn more systemic things and apply that to, clinical practice. Or you could talk about how you want to be BABCP accredited if they offer that. I'd really take that opportunity to target that towards the courses that you're applying to, because that's a really easy way of targeting it. The fourth question, I think, is around other information about yourself apart from psychology. Just, make sure you come across. And I think it's difficult because that section always, to me, feels like a UCAS application, like the UCAS personal statement where you're like, I'm really, really good at hockey and I did D of E and therefore I'm going to be a good psychologist. But I think what they're trying to get is, a sense of who you are, because lots of people are going to write really similar things on the application. So they want to get a sense of who you are and what interests you. And they also want to know that you have a life outside of psychology, which we all do, but they want to make sure that there's some evidence of that and things that you're interested in. Then there's the question around references. So I wouldn't say there's any particular structure to that. If you have any reference issues, just write them simply and clearly in there. And then the last question is around any other information. So this could be something around any of your like social graces that you feel are important and are different. If you're from a different background to the majority of people that get onto training, if you're from an underrepresented group, it can be helpful to talk about that. If you're a carer or you've had experience with mental health, you can disclose it as well if you want to. I would also diplomatically suggest some caution. I don't want to. I really don't. I want everyone to be able to say, disclose who they truly are. But, we are not in a powered position when we apply to training. And it is very competitive. And some courses don't value lived experience. I would encourage you to apply for the courses that do value lived experience and, be your authentic, true self. But all I would say is if there are courses and you're worried about whether they will, consider your lived experience or how they'll take that, I would encourage you to try and talk to trainees on that course. Put a note up on the Facebook group saying, look, is anyone around that could talk to me about it? Because I just want some advice. You may not get anything back, but that's what I would advise. So that's all the different questions, all the different answers on there. The next question is, can we use specific client examples in the personal statements? Yeah, but obviously bearing in mind anonymity and confidentiality. So, I wouldn't be saying that you worked with Mike in Barnsley who worked in Tesco's on weekends. I wouldn't be giving any identifiable information. I would be saying things like, worked with one client who was from a different ethnic or racial background to me, different cultural background to me. And, you can talk about it like that, but very general, I would say. And I think if you're using a specific example, that can be really good because you're showing how you meet a criteria rather than just telling them. But I would also say make sure that it really is relevant to what you're talking about. What I wouldn't do is go through like a massive vignette of their background and their developmental history and all of this. Just using it as like a little. I have worked with people from different cultural backgrounds, for example, if that's a point you want to make. So yeah, I think you can just make sure you maintain anonymity and confidentiality. And the final question I had on Instagram, so before I come to you lovely YouTube people, is how does the workload compare to undergraduate level? And do you still feel mentally stimulated by the learning? So I think it depends where you went for undergrad, and I think it depends on where you are on the course as well. So my undergrads, we didn't have a lot of contact hours. So like if you went somewhere like Oxford for your undergrad, we're going to have very different responses here because I did not go to Oxford for my undergrad. So yeah, I think my workload in undergrad felt lots more manageable, definitely. But equally, like at an undergraduate level, you're not used to studying at a university level. So it shouldn't be as hard as the doctorate. It is incremental for a reason. So yeah, I think there's definitely differences. Do I still feel mentally stimulated by the learning? I would be lying if I said yes 100% of the time, because we get taught on a whole variety of things, and there are some things that aren't interesting to me. There are some things that I am really, really interested in, but some things I can take or leave. And I think that's the case with any kind of big learning, big training that you do. So yeah, I think I still do generally feel mentally stimulated by it, but it's not always the easiest. It's not always easy to tell. So what I'm going to do is go back to, I'll go back to just me, hello, and then I can answer some of your lovely questions. So we have first of all got, and I will maybe say your names if you're happy for me to. I've got Ria here, who says, I've done an undergrad and a postgrad in psychology from India. I worked for 1 year there. I've now got my job as an assistant psychologist in the UK. Am I eligible to get funding for the DClin, or will I get HCP registration with this qualification? So I will preface this by the fact that I do not know a massive amount about applying as an international person, because I am not an international candidate. So what I would say is that it depends on your visa and your status. So it depends completely on. So there are a few people that aren't UK nationals but have leave to remain, so they are able to get the NHS funding. So it really depends on what your status is like and what the agreement is with the government. So you may have like I don't know how it works, to be honest. You may have like a work visa that allows you to work as an assistant for, the duration of the contract or permanently. But to study, you might need a different type of thing. So yeah. And in terms of HCP registration, that is only something you need when you're qualified, because HCPC are the governing kind of one of the regulatory bodies for practitioner psychologists. So yeah, you don't need to worry too much about it until you've graduated. I've not even thought about it yet. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, but there is a really good video by Sharon B. Psych. So if you're watching this later, I will put it down in the description below as well. I'll make sure I put a link to her video, because she goes through how to apply as an international candidate. There are also some great pages on Clearinghouse about international candidates as well. So yeah, definitely have a little look. Then I've got a lovely question here from Liv. What are your best tips for cutting down personal statements section and making yourself stand out? So I know I've talked a lot about the personal statements, and that is probably the thing that we're going to talk about a lot. I would say for cutting down, the way that I write things is I write everything and then cut it back. So I'm not very good at editing as I go. I need to write it all and then scale it back. I'd encourage you to really, really look at every single word and every single sentence to see whether there's any little characters you can take out. Because if you can take out 1 or 2 little characters from every sentence just through rewording, then that actually could be quite a lot of characters. That could be a couple of sentences that you've got yourself. So yeah, I'd really think about that. How I did it, it's not environmentally friendly, I know, but I printed out each application, each personal statement thing. I used to do it on Word because it's much easier to edit. And then I'd just go through it that way and just think about any ways that I can just, change the wording. If you have a look at the big video that I'll link down below as well, then you'll be able to see an example of what I mean. And making yourself stand out. Yeah. I think I read a lot of applications, and I haven't shortlisted for the DClin. I haven't, so take this as a bit of a pinch of salt. But I have read a lot of DClin applications as a trainee and made some suggestions for people who have then got on. So I feel like I can give this advice, hopefully. But what I would say about standing out is I think a lot of people write, what's in their experience section a lot of the time, and I think. It can, that's already in your experience section. You don't need to reflect on that. You don't need to make that, it doesn't need to be like that. What it does need to be is reflections. So try and avoid, the biggest bit of advice, I would say, is try to avoid general statements that anybody could write. If you're reading it and you go, oh, another AP could have written that, or anyone could write that, then take it out or make it more specific, because it needs to be about you. I had lots of people waste characters at the top by saying something like, I wish to apply for the doctorate in clinical psychology because I'm enthusiastic and I'm keen and I'm experienced or whatever. Just take it out. Take it out. It's fluff. No one reads it. It doesn't add any value. So I'd really encourage you to think about what adds value, what really adds value to what you're saying. Hopefully that helps. I've got a lovely question here from Princess. I've trained as a PWP. Would you recommend adding the qualification I gained as it's a graduate certificate under the university grade bit? Yeah, I'll pop it in there. I don't know, the application's changed since I last did it, but I have had a quick look. I think it's on the academic qualifications or like something on there. Yeah, I pop it on there because it's something you got from university. Yeah. Lovely. And this is from LFC. Do you think working in a mental health role only involving children and young people is a strength or a weakness for the doctorate application, like a children's wellbeing practitioner or education mental health practitioner roles? I don't think it is like a weakness to only have worked with one clinical population. It depends on the level of experience. If you've only had one job, then yes, your experience is going to be limited. I think But lots of people, like I came onto training only having worked with older adults and working age adults. I've never worked with learning disabilities. I've never worked with children. So, you know, I don't know. It might not. It depends on the course and it depends on your experience. You know, if you've had 3 different roles all working with children in different settings, then great. Yeah, so a huge amount of variety. But again, I think it's to do with the number of roles or perhaps even more like the reflection that you've got and what you've gotten out of it. So hopefully that helps. Oh, good. I'm glad it's helpful. Good. I've also got a question here from Nicole. So how do you tackle the description of your roles with such limited word count? Is it okay to almost bullet point there with no reflection? Yes. So this is how I did it. In the experience section, you list your role, you know, your hours, all of that stuff. And then I numbered them. So I just put, you know, I should really have got my application up. That would have been helpful. So I put like assistant psychologist in whatever service it was. Number 1, large scale service audit into psychological outcomes of therapy, and then 2, development and co-facilitation of 3 different types of group, you know, or whatever it is. Yeah, I would do numbers. And then, because it is really tight for I can't remember what it is. It's like 120 characters or something ridiculous. It's like a tweet. It's ridiculous. So yeah, it's really hard. And what I would do is try and put what you put in number 1 slot, try and make that, if you can try and make that the most important one, or the thing that you learnt the most from, or the thing that you've spent the most time doing. I would recommend doing that, because as well, you've got to remember the people that are reading these applications may have like a lot of applications to read. So you want to make the information really clearly stand out. They will assess your writing skill on the personal statements. So experience-wise, yeah, I think you can absolutely do that. And that's how I would prefer to read information if I had to read, 20 applications. So hopefully that helps. And there's a question here from Hannah. 2 questions, if that's okay. That's fine. Which reflective models have you found most helpful? So let's do them one at a time. So, yes, reflective models. So the reason that I actually started the YouTube was because I had feedback from an interview at Cardiff that was unsuccessful, saying that I needed to do some more reflection and use some reflective models. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know any reflective models. I didn't know anything. So I did some research into them, found loads, started doing the YouTube stuff. So there are lots of different ones on there, and I found them all useful in different ways. So I would really encourage you to have a little look at those. I'm not plugging my other videos, but just have a little look. Or if you join our Facebook group, Clinical Psychology Community UK, on the files bit, you should be able to see all of the templates. If they're not there, drop me an email or drop me a comment below, and I'll definitely get them to you. So I'd encourage you to have a play around with them, because I found that things like the Gibbs model was really good if I had something clinical to think about. There's also, I think the Johns model was really good for when I wanted to think more about how things to do with me related to the experience that I had. That deeper reflection, because it has lots of questions with prompts. And as I say, I have done templates for all of these, so they should be available somewhere. If they're not, contact me and I will get them to you. And you can always drop me an email. It's Clinical Psychology Community UK@gmail.com. I'll put that down in the chat in a minute, so it should be on there. And then the second question from Hannah is, how do you deal with comparison during the application process? What I'm taking that to mean is how do I manage, comparing myself to other people during the application process? Is that what you mean, Hannah? Let me know if it isn't. But that's what I'll start rambling about. So yeah, I think it's difficult because lots of the time you might be an assistant or, a pre-training role. You might be around other people that are applying for training. You also may be part of Facebook groups or watch YouTubers like me or whoever. And you might compare yourself and think, oh my God, I'm never going to do it. Unfortunately, that is part of the condition that we all have of imposter syndrome around this. And I think it's a very difficult, it's almost an inevitable consequence of this. There is definitely work to do around that, and you don't have to feel that way, because I think everyone feels that way. And I would always encourage you to remember that what we present out to other people is not necessarily how we feel inside. And I remember feeling horrendous, thinking that everybody else knew what they were doing and I didn't know anything. And actually, it's only, to be honest, for me, through doing the YouTube stuff and the Instagram stuff that I've realized that I actually do have some knowledge. It's like sometimes you need to be able to get that knowledge out to realize how much you've got. So yeah, it is difficult. I would really encourage you to try your very best to just focus on what you're doing, because, the courses, yes, of course, they're going to be comparing you, but is it helpful to compare? I think that's the thing that I've got myself into the habit of doing. But I think particularly on the DClin, because there's less time to think about stuff, you just kind of have to think, okay, is this helping me right now? No, it's not. Okay, so I can't compare myself. All I can do is do my best. That's all you can do, because comparing isn't helpful. And it's also going to cloud the way that you think about doing the application and everything. So really try it and almost be very blinkered. And you could do that, really practically. You could do that by just saying to people, I don't want to talk about the application, don't want to talk about it to anyone else. You could do that. That's fine. So yeah, there's a few different ways. I hope that helps, Hannah. Yes, good. No worries. Hannah says that she ran out of characters on when she asked the question, so she couldn't type the full question. Yeah, fair. Okay, and I've got another one here. This will be my 4th time applying. Last year I got a reserve offer after interview. Oh, I'm so sorry. That is really rough. How did you find having to go through the process each year, and how did you stay motivated to keep going? Yeah, so I applied 6 times. The 6th time, fortunately, I got on. I was a reserve place, and I got offered my place the day before the deadline closed. So I was pretty much resigned to the fact I wasn't going to get a place. And my heart genuinely does break for you, because I think the reserve process has to be what it is. But it's heartbreaking for the, hundreds of people that don't get on once they've got a reserve offer. Because as well, there's no guarantee that you'll get on next year. So that, that is so tough. I'm really sorry. I did not keep the motivation to keep going most of the time. And the last time I applied was really difficult, particularly when I got the reserve. Because it wasn't like the course that I applied to tell the top 10 people in the reserves what number they are, but anyone outside of that, you just get told you're on the reserves. So in my head, I was number 36. I was the last one. So that was really rough, and it took a few days of solid crying, to be honest, and being really upset. But I would also say that the previous years I was just as gutted, actually, but I wouldn't let myself feel that emotion. So what I would say is, if you are unsuccessful this year, and I really, really hope you're not, I've got everything crossed for you, or for anyone that might be unsuccessful this year, really allow yourself the time to feel that and process it, rather than go, okay, I'll go on to the next one. I'm going to apply for another job. I'm going to do, really, because that's what I did. But I would really encourage you to allow yourself time to process and grieve the kind of what you thought your life might be for the next 3 years, because it is a big shift. It's a big change. And it's a big sacrifice, actually, a lot of the time. So, and if you're geared up for that and ready, that's great. But then if you've made lots of sacrifices already, perhaps, and then it doesn't happen, it's really tough. But like we would always say to our clients, I'd really encourage you not to avoid that emotion and really feel it. Cry about it. Go and exercise if that's what helps you get through emotion, or, go and do something fun. Just process that emotion. I'd encourage you to. Good luck. I really hope it goes okay. Do you know whether applications are enhanced by previous unrelated work experience, for example, lawyer, if you highlight relevant soft skills gained? Bear with me. I'm really sorry, team. There's someone at my door. Sorry. I had a delivery, my husband's not in, so I had to just get it. Right. So the question was, do you know whether applications are enhanced by previous unrelated work experience, like a lawyer, if you highlight relevant soft skills gained? Yeah, I think the thing is, we are wanting to promote diversity, right? And diversity isn't just in terms of social graces and demographics, it's also in terms of experiences. And I think the contributions that people have, if you're from a psychology background, purely psychology background, are great. I also think people that have had different experiences, also super great. And it gives you that kind of, you discuss things differently. So I think it can be really helpful. In terms of on the application, I don't know is the really honest answer. I think it depends how you do it. So yeah, if you can think of, let's take lawyer, right, as a background. Well, lawyers have to deal with people that are in distress a lot of the time, depending on what sort of law you're in. You have to deal with people that might be in distress, or you might have to also be quite, have a lot of integrity and ethics. Those are really important things. And what I would do is make sure that there is a substantial link to training. And what they like to see is that clinical experience more so. So if you can link up to those things a little bit more, then yeah, absolutely, I'd go for it. It might be that it's not something you talk about in the personal statements. It might be just something you put in the experience section. Or it might be something you put in the additional factors to consider about me, if you wanted to add it in there. So yeah, I think so. It's always good to have a bit more diversity, I think. I've got a lovely question from Lily. Would you please be able to say a little more about lived experience, including this in your application anywhere? Yeah. So as I say, I think lived experience is really valuable. We all have some form of lived experience. If it's not personal to us, it will be someone we know or a family. So yeah, I think it's really valuable. I think, like I said, we're not in a powered position as people applying for these courses. And absolutely things are changing, and lots of courses are really open to people with lived experience. Lots of them aren't. And they're not open about that. So I think it can be very difficult. I would really encourage you to talk to trainees that are on those particular courses to see what their experiences have been of lived experience on the course. And I would also think about why you want to write about your lived experience, because other underrepresented groups, so not just lived experience, but culturally underrepresented groups may want to put that in, but you don't want it to come across as tokenistic, like, oh, well, I should be on training because I've got lived experience. I don't think anyone would take it that way. But I think it needs to have some value to it. So are you talking about your lived experience because that's why you wanted to do psychology? Or are you talking about lived experience because that is related to how you've experienced services? Stream is frozen, so let me just have a little look. Okay, good, we're back. Okay, sorry for the pause. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't talking into nowhere. Yes, so you can put it so in terms of adding it to your application, really think about why you're adding it. I would put it into the section where it's, you can put it in any, in the personal statements if it's useful, in the earlier ones, but you can put it also in the last one. Yeah. I hope that helps. So what would be the best way to start the personal statement? I feel like I have writer's block since last year where I got rejected pre-interview stage. Yeah. And by the way, getting rejected pre-interview, super common. So don't worry, it's nothing to worry about. That sadly is the case. Like it's not uncommon. I think opinion varies. Some people like to have an opening bit saying why they want to do stuff. Some people really don't want to have an opening bit. I'm personally on the get involved, start it. So I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with just writing stuff, like choosing a few points that you want to write about. So structure it. What are your points that you want to write about? And then going straight into it. I think I started mine with a sentence about the journey to training has built my resilience through this, and this. I think that's how I started it. So you could start with, this is, you could structure it in terms of like, this is why I became interested in stuff, and this is the experience that I've got, onto, these are the experiences that make me really good for training. You could structure it like that. I would just encourage you to not think too much about the start. So you can say, okay, I'm going to start at my second paragraph. Start it there, and then I think the pressure of starting it might be taken away a little bit. And also, I wonder if the writer's block might be related to not knowing what you want to write yet and not having a really clear idea. So I'd encourage you to spend some time just free writing stuff. and seeing what seems good and what doesn't, because you will very quickly see which bits feel useful and which ones don't. So, if you're writing a point about, how you can thoroughly assess risks because of a really risky situation that you were in, but actually you don't really like the way that comes across and you can't word it in an okay way, then you can cut it. But I'd encourage you to just start writing stuff on a Word document. Just start, or you can start structuring it by just writing. Paragraph 1 is going to be talking about resilience. Paragraph 2 is going to be talking about formulation. You could structure it that way and then just write. So the start is kind of taken out of your mind, if that makes sense. I hope that helps. You are very welcome. I've got lots of people saying thank you. No worries. So I've got another one here saying, I didn't get my predicted A-level grades, but have since got my bachelor's and master's. Would you recommend addressing this in the application, as in the kind of low A-level results? It depends on the course. Some courses like Oxford and Bath, they really care about academics. So they will look at your A-levels and they will score you accordingly. So yes, very possibly. If you're applying to one of those courses that shortlist on academics, yes, I would put that in there. Put in there a reason as to why that happened. But actually you have gone on to show that you can study at a postgraduate level, so it shouldn't matter. There's a whole thing about whether courses should be able to, should be shortlisting based on academics and based on A-levels particularly. But have a little look. And those courses that do shortlist on academics will have, somewhere on their website, they will have the academic shortlisting criteria. It won't, so they usually then will assign they'll assign points to the number of A-levels or A's at A-level you got, the first class at undergrad, if you've got a distinction at your master's, if you have a PhD, they'll assign points. What they won't do, so you can work out what your total points are, but they won't tell you what the threshold is, because it will change every year, because everybody will have different experiences every year. So it might be that, let's say you are one of the only people applying with a master's one year. Well, then you're going to score higher than everybody else, aren't you? So, they've got to adjust it every year. So they won't tell you what that shortlisting threshold is. But yeah, I would address it in there, if you are applying to one of those courses. Lovely. I've got another one here saying, how do you prove your degree was BPS accredited? Yeah, and I'm not sure I can remember. I think I had a letter from the BPS. I think I asked them for a letter that just I'm sure it's on BPS letterhead, just stating that I've got GBC. And what I would do is encourage you to have a folder on your computer that just says DClin Psych, and you can have each year entry, hopefully just one, each year entry on there, and you can have all the documents that you need, so your GBC confirmation there. Your university may also provide one, a letter saying that it was BPS accredited. So either your university where you got the degree or the BPS, contacting them. Oh, no worries. Structure. So someone's just saying that they're really struggling with structuring. Structuring is really, really hard. And when you're faced with just like a blank page and you're like, oh my God, this is so much pressure, it is really hard. So don't worry. One more question. No worries. Where it asks you to give information about any time not in relevant experience, how much information do you need to provide? For example, 3 months of traveling. Yes. So it depends on how long the gap was, I would say. So if you've done 3 months of traveling, you can just put 3 months of traveling and where you went, maybe. So I did that. I said about me having a gap year and what I did in the gap year and, all that stuff. So yeah, I don't think you need to put loads of information, but you can just put a few bits in. Yeah, don't stress too much. I think they just want to know, if you had like a 5-year gap, they'd want to know what that's about, basically. Someone else is talking about A-levels here. I also struggle with my A-levels, but otherwise was a straight A student. Is it worth applying to Oxford? Because I know that they do take that into account. I don't have a master's, but I got a first for my undergrad. It's really hard to say because it changes every year. I know someone that I'm on the, there's a few people on the course that didn't have amazing A-levels. They don't have PhDs. So it really depends. I would say if the Oxford course is somewhere you really want to study, then I'd encourage you to apply. But I would also say that there's simply no guarantee. And if you look at the Oxford scoring, I think they only give points for a first at undergrad, or they give more points for a first at undergrad. They only give points for a master's if it's distinction, and they only give points for, like, they give lots of points for a completed PhD as well, because they really value research. So it's really hard to say. I'm sorry, I can't be more decisive on that. I think have a little look out, because it also depends on where you want to apply and what's important to you. I think it could be worth it, but I don't know. It's the really honest answer. I think in my year there were 660 that applied and 36 places, and I think in the upcoming year there's going to be more places. There's going to be significantly more places. Like, I think in the year below us there's like 45, and in the year after that I think it's 52. So they are increasing, but applications are also increasing. So yeah, it's really difficult to say. Sorry. And another question here: what would you say are the key skills for a clinical psychologist which should be highlighted in the application? Depends on the course. I feel like I've answered every question saying depends, but it really does. It depends on the course. Like Oxford, for example, really value research. So that's definitely something they would class as a very key competency of a clinical psychologist, in terms of being a consumer and a producer of high quality research, and being able to critique research is very important for them. And actually in practice it does seem to be the case. Psychologists are often asked to present relevant research to an MDT that's recently come out. So we need to be able to disseminate and critique research. So yeah, that's an important one. I would definitely say clinical stuff is important. So it could be assessment, formulation, intervention, risk assessment, something around that is important, because you're going to be working clinically, and depending on where you are, what placement you've got, even if you're on the same course as somebody else, you may have a completely different experience with placement. You may have someone that really wants to micromanage a little bit, or you may have someone that just leaves you to it. So you need to be able to do some clinical stuff and have a sense of clinical confidence in your judgment as well. So yeah, I would say definitely something to do with that. There's something in there as well around, I think resilience can be a really useful thing, and also being able to look after yourself when you hear a lot of really stressful things. We are really privileged to be able to sit in rooms with people when they tell us the deepest traumas that they've gone through, and trust us with that information. But that can take a toll on us, and we need to have really robust ways of managing that. So I think that's a very important thing. It could be that you've got supervisor experience as well, and that's really good, because clinical psychologists are trained to be leaders in the NHS. That is a key part of third year training, and the NHS only trains 2 different disciplines to doctorate level, apart from medicine. Can't remember what the other one is. And one is clinical psychology. So they really want, they're investing a lot of money in us. It's over sort of 200 grand to train one of us over the 3 years. Like, it's a lot of money. So they want to make sure that we are going to be in those leadership roles. So if we've got, if you've got any experience of leadership or anything like that, that can be helpful. There is also, if you have a look, if you search DClin Psych competencies, I think the University of Exeter has had a list that I referred to quite a lot during my application. So yeah, and I'll try and link that down below as well. I haven't got any more questions come through, so please do pop some in there if you are interested. And if you've got any other questions about the DClin or DClin applications, I'm very, very open to talking about them. So let me know what you think. I think the process is tough. Okay, like, we all know this. The process is super tough, but it can be very, very rewarding, and it can happen. And I think it's so easy to become really disheartened about it. I did, for years. I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to get in. And the application is one step in that, Someone said, I struggle with exploring my reflections. I keep using learnt or understood, which makes me feel like a 6th grader. What resources would you recommend for this, so I'm not repetitive? Do it on Word and use a thesaurus. That's my biggest thing. Yeah. And thinking about different ways that you can say that, because I think if you're using things like, I learnt this, then you're telling them what you've learnt. You're not showing them. I think it is difficult. I would try and use more like examples and reflections. So I'm just trying to think of like language that might be more useful. On reflection, I have found X, Y, and Z. On reflection, I have found that working with somebody culturally different to me is challenging but really beneficial, and I'm really looking forward to doing that on training, or some, tidy it up a little bit, but something like that would be useful. I would also think about, if you're writing that a lot, if you're writing that sort of thing a lot, then maybe we need to reduce the amount of points that you're making, because lots of people write, I learned about formulation, assessment, intervention, risk assessment, risk management, safeguarding. I've learned about all of these things. I've learned this, this, and this, and I've learned this, this, and this, and I've learned how to do supervision. I've learned it all. That's great, super great. But remember, some of that is going to be in your experience section. So show them what you've learned. How have you learned it? That's the most important thing. How have you learned it? So if you read what you've written and you don't know how you've learned it, then you need to make it clear how you've learned it. That's something you definitely need to do. I hope that somewhat helps. It's really difficult. Another question here is around how to balance writing an application and working. Yeah, that's tricky. I can't lie to you, that's really tricky. Depends what role you're in. Your supervisor might be really supportive of you applying for the doctorate and may well offer you a bit of time, or you can say, look, could I just take a couple of hours and I'll work them back when the application's gone in. You can do that. I found it very helpful to be boundaried. So yeah, it's really helpful to spend lots of time on it, but also you have to have a life, and it will be helpful for doctorate life when you get on if you're able to balance those things. So having a bit of boundary time. So you say, okay, Tuesdays and Thursdays is when I'm going to work on the application, or reversed. Tuesdays and Thursdays are when I'm going to go out. I'm not going to do any application on the weekend, or I'm only going to do it on the weekends. It is tricky. But also I would say lots of jobs should allow you time for reflection. Lots of pre-training roles should allow you time for reflection. So you can use that time, if you can find some, to think about it. And it might even be in supervision, you can do some reflection. Because reflection isn't just sitting down and writing or keeping a diary or whatever. It's also actually about talking. And, I've been reflecting with you today. You've been reflecting with me by asking me questions and telling me your reflections. So it's an active, dynamic process. So yeah, I think that can be helpful. But it is difficult. And I guess the important thing is to think, okay, it's only for a short period of time. If you have to work in the evenings to do your application, it's only going to be a small amount of time. Can you tell us more about the references that are needed? Yes, I can. Absolutely. So you will need an experience reference, and that is usually your most recent supervisor. It should be a clinical psychologist or a counselling psychologist, at a push a psychotherapist, but really it should be a clinical psychologist, because they are the ones that the reference isn't like a normal reference where people just say, yes, they turned up on time and they were great. It's, can they meet the clinical demands of training? Can they juggle all of the demands of training? And do you think they have the competencies sufficient enough to build on training? So they really need to know what training involves. And that's why clinical psychologist references are valued more highly. And that, for me, is why assistant psychologist jobs are the ones that get you onto training, because you have a clinical psychologist there. So if you don't have a clinical psychologist to write your reference, that's okay. It doesn't always have to be. It's best to be. But I think they need to, if you have someone that isn't a clinical psychologist, you need to know about it so you can judge whether I'm able to do it. Would you like help with the reference in terms of could I link you in with a clinical psychologist anywhere that might be able to give you some advice? Offer the options. So that's your experience reference. You will not see the reference. So what you will do on the application is you'll put in your experience reference and your academic reference, like an email for them, and press send. And the email will send straight away. The email request will send straight away. They will then have like a portal that they can go onto to write their reference and submit it. The reference is then attached to your application, but you can't see the reference. So then the references are then sent off with the application in total. So then your academic reference really needs to be somebody from university, like a university supervisor. Ideally, it would be at postgraduate level, but lots of people can't do that, and that's fine. But it needs, the academic reference is about, can this person study at doctorate level? If your supervisor, if either of your references are going to say that you cannot do the doctorate, do not use them. And really question, okay, like have a conversation about that. Like, whoa, why, what is it that you think that I'm not able to do? Like, can we build this into my work plan? Can we add some development here? Really, people shouldn't be saying that, but that's the truth. You know, people can't give a bad reference except on the doctorate. I've had people that said that they've, you know, people have recommended that they couldn't get onto training. And I think it's always worth talking to your supervisor first. The problem lots of people have with academic references, referees, is that they either don't have any contact with them, they've moved on, they may have passed away, you know, they don't remember them. So that's usually the biggest thing. For me, I had the first few, I had my undergraduate. For the first two, I had my undergraduate supervisor, who has since passed away, actually, sadly. And for the last 4, I had my master's supervisor. So she was able to say, yes, she can study at a doctorate level. So yeah, that's what you need for the application references. Good. I'm glad people have found it helpful. I'm really pleased. I think sometimes it's just nice to be able to like have a session and talk about it. And I was going to do a Teams session, but then, you know, people may not want to talk in front of each other. So I thought this would be easier. So another question is, do our applications get sent off at the same time? Is it worth applying earlier? At school, when applying for uni, we were told to submit earlier as it increases our chances of getting accepted. Yeah. No. So how Clearinghouse do it is they will, they may release your application when it's sent, as long as it's complete. So as long as you have submitted the application, you paid, both your references are attached, they may send it early. They usually send them in batches. So they may send some in November, for example, but there won't, as far as I'm aware, there is no correlation between how early and if you get on or not. I don't think that's how it happens. As far as I'm aware, someone may correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's how it works. And then usually what happens, so the deadline's in November, but I think the deadline for referees is like January, because that's the time that the applications are released to the course centres. Like, they have to be released, I think. So yeah, I don't think it's of any value applying early, other than saving the money. Of course, you can save £10. Another question here is, do you have any advice for what to do when not hearing back from your academic reference? They provided my reference last year and I got an interview, but I emailed them last week and haven't heard back. Yeah, to be honest, keep emailing. Or if it's been a month or so and you've not heard anything and they don't have an out of office on, can you try and ring them, or ring through the university, or ring the department? I try something like that. Because I had this issue actually one year. I was not successful this year, but I had an issue where my university supervisor couldn't supply my reference because she was poorly, and my master's supervisor was on maternity leave. But she had done my one the year before. So I emailed Clearinghouse and said, can we use the same reference, because it won't have changed because I haven't had any more contact with her. And they did add it. I didn't get shortlisted. Actually, I did get shortlisted that year for interview, actually. So I think that sometimes is the case. If you email Clearinghouse, they will be able to provide you some advice on that. No worries. You're very welcome. People saying thank you. I'm struggling to come up with the experience reference, but this has really helped. I don't actually have any NHS experience, so I'm not sure if it's worth applying, but I have a master's. Yeah, I think some courses really want a strong commitment to the NHS, and they want that NHS experience. So Oxford, Bath, they are ones that want that. Some aren't so worried about it and realise that people have a range of experiences. As long as they're committed to the NHS, that's the main thing. I think it definitely is worth applying. Lots of people don't have NHS experience. I think the thing with NHS experience is that it helps you kind of know a little bit more about what you're getting yourself in for in the NHS. And that isn't just in terms of training, that's also in terms of those more leadership positions later on, because they don't want to spend that much money, public money, training us if we're then going to leave after a couple of years and go private, because that's the crisis that we're in at the moment. Every team that I've ever worked in has had a vacancy for a clinical psychologist, because lots of people are reducing their public hours. So yeah, I think so. Another one here. Is it fine if I ask my undergraduate teacher, not a supervisor, for academic reference? Yeah. I think so. The academic reference does talk about ability to study at a doctorate level. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your supervisor, but they will want to know what sort of relationship you had and whether, and that relation, they will work out whether they will work out what the reference means by that relationship. So if they have been a supervisor of yours, then they are the arguably the best placed to provide a reference for you and say whether you are able to study at a doctorate level. Sometimes that isn't the case, and sometimes you may get on really well with a module leader or a supervisor or a teacher, and they may best be able to do it. But I would really think about who is going to say that you can study at a doctorate level, and do you have a legitimate enough relationship that they will be able to comment that, not just because they like you. Lovely. Hopefully all of those things are helpful. I appreciate that there are so many questions that come up about the DClin, but the fact that you're here this evening and that you might be watching it at home as well, it's going to be really helpful, I think, hopefully, and it shows that actually you're really taking an active role in your application, because I think a lot of people just write them and send them, and actually I think it is a very different application to ones that you will have been used to at pre-training roles. It's a very different process, so it takes some time to finesse and some skill to understand what to write. If that makes sense. You are very, very welcome, everybody. If there aren't any more questions, I will start wrapping up. But I'm very, very grateful for each and every one of you for joining today, because it really means a lot, actually. And I didn't really think we'd get here when I first started doing it. I'd have like 1 or 2 people join the live streams. So it's really nice that we've got more people here today. So thank you all so much for coming. As I say, it really does mean a lot. And I'm hoping you're all subscribers, but please do subscribe if you like. And if you've got Instagram, do find us on there, because we do monthly Q&A sessions. We also do weekly updates about training and things. We post posts referencing the video that we've just put up as well. And I'm really keen to hear what you guys want on the channel. So please do let me know if there's anything particularly that you want. But anyway, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you all today, and I wish you all the best for the future. Drop me a comment down below if there's any questions that you've got around the DClin application, and drop me an email if that is also helpful as well. Right.